This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Home Abstract and Title Company was founded in 1867 and is the oldest company still operating in McLennan County. Home Abstract is comprised of a team of honest, friendly, hardworking professionals dedicated to providing both commercial and residential real estate clients with the highest level of communication and service. Their team is committed to working hard and building and maintaining strong relationships because transactions are so much more than just deals. They are clients, deserving of the courtesy, care, and respect that Home Abstract and Title Company is known for. Visit Home Abstract and Title Company at homeabstract.com.
Cross the Brazos and Waco, ride hard and I'll make it by dawn. Cross the Brazos and Waco, I'm safe when I reach San Antonio.
Well, welcome back to the Waco History Podcast. We are almost a year into our Crossroads series, and it's taken us all sorts of different places, and we invite you to go back and listen to all those episodes that we have had. And one aspect of Waco's history that we got into that we just kept getting into deeper, Rick, was entertainment.
Yeah, surprisingly, there's a lot more to be uncovered in that topic than I expected.
Mm-hmm. Perhaps we're easily amused, but
and easily entertained.
Yeah. So this is Entertainment 3, and Rick, you want to introduce our guests that are with us?
Well, you probably know them better than I do, so I would suggest you.
Well, we have both of these have contributed to the fabric of Waco. Carl Hoover,
absolutely,
whose picture you've seen. Has that picture changed in 30 years, Carl? Or is
yes,
it
has.
Okay. Whose picture you see in the Waco Tribune Herald, and who has written on local arts, local entertainment for 30 years now with the Trib.
More than 30 now.
And he is literally holding the Trib up on his shoulders right now. But Carl's with us, and of course, a lot of things we're going to talk about, Carl's written on from time to time. Chris is the creative in the room. Chris Hansen is with us, a colleague at Baylor University. Chris, welcome.
Thank you.
And so Chris is a filmmaker and a professor, and Chris has filmed a lot of the landscapes in Waco, 5 or 6 different films, I think, that you've done in Waco. You want to highlight any of those now for us?
Sure. Well, the most recent one was called 7 Short Films About Our Marriage, which you can watch on Amazon. If you have Prime, you can watch that for free, or Tubi TV and other streaming services. And one before that was called Blur Circle, also on those services. And yeah, we love filming in Waco. I always tell people that Wacoans are not jaded about making movies in their city, and so they actually enjoy it, and they invite you in. And business owners, generally speaking, not every one of them, but generally speaking, are happy to have you invade their space and feature their business in your film. And it's kind of, it's a different vibe when you're out in California, which is, I haven't shot things in California, but I have been out there a lot, and I know people who make movies out there, and yeah, that's a jaded
So
environment.
Chris, I'm
to
curious,
shoot
is there an upward trend in filming in Waco, or kind of where do you think that?
Yeah,
where we
it's
are on that?
so I've been at Baylor since 2004, and nobody was really, I won't say it's never happened, but people weren't making films in Waco back then. And now we are labeled, as you guys probably know, a film-friendly city.
Mm-hmm.
And, we have the Waco arts community has grown. We have a film festival, Deep in the Heart Film Festival, which recently changed its name to the Waco Independent Film Festival. And, there's a lot more filming going on in the city as a result of that. I mean, because of what I just said, because people are really open to it. Now, hopefully we don't turn into a jaded town. But I think it's also that kind of Texas, Waco and mentality that people are just friendly.
Right. And there seems to have been a shift from California to places like Austin, with having much more production facilities, so are we getting the benefit of maybe some of that?
There's people
growth?
building studios. I know of several projects that are going on right now in the area. I know one that's being built in Lorena that's going to have virtual production capabilities. I don't know if you're familiar with virtual production, but that's where like The Mandalorian, the Star Wars television show, is shot virtual production style where...
You mean that's not all real?
Yeah.
That's on location.
Yeah.
On location.
So they shoot it in a studio, but the backgrounds are all visible to the actors instead of green screen and everything.
Right.
So that's what virtual production is. And I know of a studio that's a company that's building one in Lorena. There's several other projects in the Central Texas area that are building production studios because this area has a lot of land. It's a lot less expensive than other parts of the country, and they want the business out here. So
one of the things that each of the Deep in the Heart Film Festivals, they've had a filmmakers tour of Waco, and they drive them through, and so you can see like prairie, you can see a lake, you can see a river, you can see historic buildings, you can see modern buildings. It's all here very convenient.
So almost like as if we're a crossroads of filming locations.
Excellent.
Nice setup, I thought.
So that's Rick Tullis, co-host and creator of the Crossroads series. It's his idea. Well, that's great. That's great contemporary context. And let's go back a little bit, and then we'll come forward and kind of get to more recent things. But Rick, as he's done on this series, has done some good research on maybe some things we should think about earlier when it comes to kind of entertainment.
So I tried to find some good historical record, some things that were back there that maybe not be as well known. It gets a little difficult. I mean, we do, as we've talked about in the past in the podcast, there was lots of entertainment because you had cattle drives coming through. You had a lot of people coming through the Crossroads town, and they wanted entertainment. Most of it seemed more like saloon-based type entertainment, and not necessarily anything regionally or nationally known. Kind of the first person I came across that probably projected beyond Waco, and there were probably others, but this one I thought was an interesting one, was the daughter of Judge George Gerald. So, I know you've done some podcasts on
with Brandt,
and he's a character and all that. And actually, little foreshadowing for our next episode where we do talk about some of the criminal crossroads in Waco. But anyway, Judge Gerald was a significant person in the community. He was a county judge. He owned some business as well, but he was also a supporter of Brandt. And anyway, his daughter, one of his misfortune in his life was his daughter decided to become an actress.
Oh, shameful.
Yes, yeah. So it was not a well-regarded career choice at that time. In fact, that can probably be tied to why we see in the Waco handbooks and the directories, the prostitutes were all listed as actresses. So there may be some connections there.
That'll go forward without editorializing. Yeah, but go ahead. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So, but not today.
I think now it's independent model or something like that. But
yes. So she ended up graduating from Baylor. She taught elocution. You know what that is, right?
I do. Yeah, that's speaking
at Waco Female College, and ended up doing some acting around here at the Opera House. In one of the references I found, her dad actually locked her out of the house after a performance. He was so dead set against it. She actually ends up moving to New York City. And there's records that show she acted in many plays, at least 15, and wrote one that actually got adapted into being a silent film in 1915.
Carl, have you ever seen this silent film?
No, I haven't.
The Woman Pays, 1915. I got to see if I can find that.
Yeah, might try Netflix.
Yeah. No. YouTube.
But I think, there was a Baylor professor named Dorothy Scarborough who wrote a novel shortly after that called The Wind, and that did get made into a silent film. It had Lillian Gish.
Oh, okay.
It's a great little novel about a woman on the western Texas frontier who basically goes crazy from the isolation and this constant wind that's blowing, and her husband leaves her and such. And so the book ends in a sort of dark place. But with Lillian Gish, it ends in a happy place.
Oh.
She and her husband are reconciled.
Does it talk about, like 3 months of 100-degree heat? And does it add that into the,
Dust. Lots of dust. Wind and dust.
I could see that being tough. Yeah, so that's Florence. That's Florence Gerald. And she eventually passes away. She lives in New York at
As
that time.
we all do. Yeah.
Yes, in 1942, and got buried in a what they called it, like an actors cemetery or something. I guess they didn't. Actors didn't have much money. I think of paupers, cemeteries here, or but whatever the equivalent was is where she got buried in Valhalla, New York.
Well, a silent film, it could be an organizing principle here at the beginning. We talked about Texas Guinan before, but Carl, I know you've written some on Texas Guinan.
There was a time that I was thinking of the people you can make a great movie from Waco. She would be one because she was always changing who she was identifying. I was thinking, and this sort of dates the reference, but this would be Madonna's role. Mm-hmm. Always reinventing her.
We better hurry. Her health's not.
She grows up in Waco, and she goes to a Catholic school and sort of rebellious and such like that, and then ends up getting in vaudeville. Goes out west to follow movie making. Mm-hmm. She's involved in lots of westerns. And by this time, she has identified herself as a cowgirl from Western Waco, Texas.
Nice.
And is in a lot of the B-movie films. And I think I was looking at her filmography, and she had maybe like 20 movies in 1919.
Yeah.
So
I was about to say this was early 1900s. So, right.
Things didn't quite gel for her. She ends up in New York and has found a second or a third or fourth life as a hostess of a speakeasy, and is sort of floating through New York, one step ahead of the police and such like that, but became known as the queen of the nightclubs.
Hello, sucker.
Hello, sucker was how she would, and people would come into her club and hello, sucker. And so she made her second or third name for herself as such, from Waco, Texas. And the irony of being from straight-laced Waco to quite.
Now, did they call her Texas? Was that how she was referred to?
That's the name she takes on with her screen,
right?
Kind of her screen
I think
presence.
her baptized name was Mary.
Yeah, Mary Louise Cecilia Guinan. But I think she was a fairly good horse. Fairly good with the horse and with the rope and that sort of stuff, and so those were featured in those movies.
In her invented childhood, where she fell in the Brazos River and was swept away, but rescued. It's just okay.
Well, if you can tie your legend to that for sure. Well, one of the things, and I thought this was a really cool part of her story. I guess at some point she probably gets chased out of New York, has a traveling show, and they try to go over to Europe. And if I get the political scene right in Europe, it's post World War I. There's unemployment. They're in the Depression too, and they're trying to protect their jobs. So they really don't want outside entertainers coming in onto the continent and displacing their homegrown entertainers. So it seems like she runs into a problem. They won't let her disembark off her ship, into France, and eventually has to turn around and come back. But I love it, the marketing aspect here. She comes back and renames her show Too Hot for Paris.
That's good branding.
Yeah. Take that experience and turn it around into a net positive.
Yeah. Ann Gwynne was another name that you pulled up. There's a Texas-born early film star. We're getting to talkies now.
Yeah, born in 1918 in Waco.
Mm-hmm. And she is a co-star in the Flash Gordon series in 1940. So we're obviously transitioning by 1940 from the Westerns to some sci-fi.
Yeah. Did 60 films between 1939 and 1970. So
I looked it up, including The Horror of Frankenstein and
really?
The Black Cat.
Okay.
There you go. There's going to be a theme, especially when we get to these actors and actresses. As I was looking at them, at how many films they did, and even the more modern ones, but we might only know one or two of them.
Yeah,
it's almost like venture capitalists. You know, they go out and fund a bunch of businesses, and they only know one or two are going to make it, and those are going to be the ones that, you know, set their course. So it seems like that. You know, Chris, you're kind of in that world. It seems like that's part of the strategy. You got to put a bunch of stuff out there, and knowing one or two of them are going to make it.
Yeah, I especially in the silent era, they made so many films, and the actors were contracted, and they kept making them. They just kept making movies. It wasn't like today where they're putting millions and millions and millions of dollars. I mean, they were spending a lot of money on the movies then too, but not like they are now, and they're not huge productions. They're just like, it's like, let's go out tomorrow and make another movie, and then you know, it might take a few days, and then we're done, and then we're on to the next one. So yeah, actors would star, and then they were shorter, and so a movie might be, you know, a 40-minute or a 30-minute movie. And so, you know, our concept of what those silent movies were is a lot different than what we have today. Yeah. The industry is a very different thing.
Yeah, but under contract, you got to keep them working every day.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Otherwise, you're wasting money.
Mm-hmm.
There was a time where they had, and this is before the megaplexes, obviously, but there were 5 to 7 different movie theaters in downtown Waco.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And the Hippodrome famously, you know, started as a vaudeville house, has a fire, and then it's reborn as a movie house, and was that for much of its lifetime in downtown. There was something, and Stephen may know as much about this as I've learned, but there was a short movie called A Waco Romance that was made in the 20s or 30s, and it has footage of the Hoffmanettes.
Well, the one I'm thinking about is The Passerby.
Okay.
So it was The Passerby made, and the Texas Collection has that film. And it was made in the 19-teens, early 19-teens. And it looks, Chris, like it's the early age of film. And it was a company that would just go from town to town and kind of shoot local sites. And there may have been a bit of a storyline in there, but it's mainly for people to go to a movie theater and see themselves up on the screen.
Interesting.
And so it's really an interesting piece. And you can see the Hoffmanettes in there. You can see the Artesian Manufacturing Building. You can see them go way out to Cameron Park. I mean, they actually kind of do a journey out to Cameron Park. And so it's an interesting film. And the Texas Collection does have a copy of that.
That also has a chase sequence with an old fire engine.
There is an old fire engine in it. And there's a lot of shots on downtown streets, and it's an amazing film. So, and you can see this building in it. You can see Alico building in it.
A lot of the early silents are just gone. You know, it was very disposable. It wasn't, you know, the way we preserve things now. The fact that we shoot everything digitally and it's all, you know, on media that we can, well, don't get me talking about streaming media and how disposable that is, but the fact that we preserve everything now is a completely modern sensibility. It was like all very disposable then, not to mention film was very flammable, and we've lost I don't know what the estimates are, something like 75% or more of silent film has just gone up in smoke because it was flammable and it just burned up.
Wow.
So
yeah, I think the story of The Passerby is they found a copy in a closet.
That's how, a lot of stuff that's preserved was just somebody kept it and we got lucky. So, yeah.
All right, Stephen, I'm going to take a little bit of license on this next one. It may have been someone we should have mentioned before, but she has actually a crossover career, so I think it's worth mentioning. So Cindy Walker, she was born outside of Mart, I'm pretty sure in McLennan County. You know, Mart's kind of right there on the border, and then she ended up moving and living out most of her life in Mahia, but she's born into a musically talented family, does a little singing and dancing growing up locally. And then her dad is a cotton buyer. So they're out in LA in 1941, I believe, or 1940. She's 22. They're driving down Sunset Boulevard. They see Bing Crosby Studios, and she gets her dad to stop. And she's like, I'm gonna get him to record one of my songs. So she goes in, ends up talking to Bing's brother, who was a business manager there, grabs her mom. She accompanies her on the piano, and she plays this song, Lone Star Trail. Well, I guess he was impressed. The next day, they get her in front of Bing at a movie studio. He loves the song, signs her. He ends up recording the song. It becomes a top 10 hit. And she spends the next little over decade out in L.A. writing music, doing some performing herself, also performing in a few films. But it doesn't end there. She ends up moving back to Mahia, and she becomes this prolific writer. She writes over 500 songs that were recorded. And over 40 of them became top 40 hits. And I mean, you couldn't list all the artists, for everybody from Elvis to Gene Autry to Hank Wills to Willie Nelson. In fact, when one of her songs, and this is great, if you just went out and YouTubed "You Don't Know Me."
Could you sing a few bars of that? I think I remember it, but do you mind singing?
Yeah, well, this would be a good place to maybe put one in the.
So we will
in the record.
We will pause now for a clip of "You Don't Know Me" by Cindy Walker.
You give your hand to me, and then you say hello. And I can hardly speak, my heart is beating so, and anyone could tell, you think you know me well, but you don't know me.
Yeah, so it's a song, I mean, I've heard him by a lot of artists. I didn't realize it was from a Central Texan writer. So she gets inducted into the all the halls of fame, so Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame, Country Music Hall of Fame, just one of the most prolific songwriters in country music.
Carl, have you written about her? Written about Cindy Walker? Have you?
Yeah.
Anything else you remember from your research into Cindy Walker we need to know?
Well, and this was more sort of the crossroads of music and film.
Exactly.
But there's film of Jules Bledsoe that when he was in London, several of his songs they would do as a little tease and such like that. And so it used to be available on the internet, but Pathé Film of France had it in their archives, but several songs and arias that he would do. And so you could see Jules Bledsoe actually singing in person and such. Fast forward decades into the future, we had a hip-hop group in the 90s, High Five.
That's right.
Oh, yeah, we talked about that.
They have the last #1 chart hit made by a Waco group, and the music video from that was filmed in Waco.
Oh, wow.
And so you have, like, in the background, you have the Elite Cafe, and then you have the Suspension Bridge.
I got to go back and check that out.
There you go.
Yeah, interesting. So you were playing a clip, Rick, before we started, Victor Bozeman, one of your new favorites.
Yeah.
Yeah.
An interesting Waco connection that I came across. So born in Waco in 1929. Don't know his story, don't know his journey, but he ends up in 1950 being a disc jockey in New York City for WLIB. But then somewhere in the 60s and 70s, he begins appearing in supporting roles on TV. Let's see, some TV shows like It Takes a Thief, Ironside, Get Smart, McCloud. And then by 1974, he switches over to doing announcing work, ends up working for NBC out in Burbank, California. And really breaks a barrier. I mean, he's one of the few African Americans who gets into that line of work that early in the TV world. And so, yeah, it's fun. You can go on YouTube and find some bumpers that he did back in the 70s, and just has that very smooth, cool voice. And for those of us who were around back then, it almost sounds familiar, probably because we heard it. So
All right, while we're at it, we'll insert a clip of Victor Bozeman for you here. So the melodic sounds of Victor Bozeman.
This is Victor Bozeman. Be with us next week when NBC Late Night Movie will present Loving You, starring Elvis Presley.
So what's your thoughts of that clip, Carl?
It's unlike anything I've heard before.
Fantastic. Okay.
Or like everything you've heard before.
Everything I've heard before.
One of the two.
Yeah. For lack of a smooth transitional figure, we then jump to Shannon Elizabeth, which is much more contemporary.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, much more contemporary. How did you first see Shannon Elizabeth, Rick?
I wasn't allowed to watch those kind of movies growing up.
So Shannon Elizabeth Fadal, which is she grew up Elizabeth Fadal, I believe, in town. And star of American Pie, I think is how she kind of made a name for herself, but she's gone on to be in several different movies, and she's done professional poker playing. I had an encounter with her once. She was filming a pilot for a Who Do You Think, Where Are You From roots kind of show, and they were coming back. The Fadals were a really important Lebanese family in Waco, and we have oral histories with some of her uncles. And so she was coming back to see that as part of filming the show. I was going to show her that, and it led to controversy at Baylor University because she had appeared in Playboy magazine. And so the discussion went up to the highest level, I think, at Baylor, and ultimately they decided she was sorry. And so we did film on Baylor University campus, although it never aired. So, but one little tidbit from that I did pick up, the day of filming, in my suite in Carroll Library, someone, I still don't know who, walked in the front door, it closed behind them, and to no one in particular yelled, "The talent will be here in 5," and then turned around and walked out. And so I had my administrative assistant do that my next class period, just with the students in there, go in and announce that the talent will be here in 5 and then walk out. And I feel like since then that I should be introduced to that every class period.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add there
topic,
is, at least at this point, she's showing credited 59 movies and TV roles. So again, talking about these prolific numbers of just got to get yourself out there, got to do a lot of work.
Yeah. Any thoughts?
Well, your mention of the talent. This is digression.
Talent will be here in 5.
I've been involved in 2 movies in Waco in the time that I've been here. One was one of Chris's movies, and I think I'm a shoulder in the corner of a evening dining scene outside.
Was he believable as a shoulder?
Did he sell it?
Yeah, that's right.
We had to cut the rest of his body. So.
My Meisner training, get that shoulder in there. And then the other one was when they filmed Where the Heart Is. The final sequence at Baylor, in which they had one of the hundreds of extras running in the background. And Baylor was standing in for Bowdoin University in Maine, and it was supposed to be fall in Maine, and it's like 95 degrees in Waco, Texas, and say, "Here, wear this brown sweater as part of your thing to walk across the quad." Or something.
You were a professor. You probably were a professor.
Exactly.
In that scene,
exactly. Anyway, Natalie Portman was the star of that film, and this is the time that she had just signed on and was doing some of the Star Wars films, big star in Waco and such. So I'm a lowly extra. We've already been given instructions: do not mess with the talent. Stay away from anything. So we're waiting on a scene to be set up, and this young woman comes into the shot, and she's standing, and the camera people are getting their angles, and they're adjusting. This is Natalie Portman, and I'm only 20 feet away. And it was later I found out she was the body double. Brought her in, she's the right height, and they could get their lighting off that. And I never saw Natalie Portman in Waco.
So it seems like the status of actresses has changed over the podcast so far. That
it may not be quite as objectionable
as it used to be. Peri Gilpin is another one. It's quite famous, and
especially if you're an 80s and 90s TV watcher.
Mm-hmm. But she Roz on Frasier for that reference for many of you. But she's also appeared in a lot of films and different TV shows.
And she does a lot of animated voiceover work now.
Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah, she is. I think she's still appearing in some TV, but she has segued into doing a lot of animated voiceover work. So I don't know if that's was a decision related to family. I think it's easier to do voiceover work than I know it's easier to do voiceover work than appearing in television series. But yeah, she does a ton of it. So
Chris, do you do voiceover work?
I would happily do it if somebody wanted to hire me.
You got a good
but,
voice.
yeah,
I think Chris has a good voice.
this is a voice affected by having a growth on my vocal cords. So
Okay.
so it's a little lower now than it used to be. I have a little more gravel in it. So
Well, that's good though.
yeah,
That's
it
good.
works.
Maybe a villain.
There's a
maybe
market.
Right,
There's a
right.
market
It
for
works.
that.
Yeah, there's a market for gravel. Yeah.
Jennifer Love Hewitt, another Waco-born actress.
Yeah, there is I think there is a podcast on this network called Jennifer Love Hewitt, Please Come on Our Show.
I think I've heard of that.
Yeah, and I don't know how many episodes they've done, but as of yet, she is not. So if she's a Waco History Podcast listener, just consider it.
Yeah.
Or even better, come on the Waco
Yeah,
History
that's right.
Podcast and really show them
We'll
up.
absorb
That's right.
them.
That's right. Yeah. She's been in over 65 films, TV shows, music videos, and animated voiceovers. So, still going strong.
And then a name that gets brought up all the time, who was not very old when he left Waco, is Steve Martin. So Steve Martin, born in Waco, August 14th, 1945. His family moved to California when he was 5. So this comes up all the time, right, Carl? I mean, people say this all the time.
Well, let me give you an interesting thing that never made it into a story. But you have Steve Martin, who's born in Waco, 1945. You have Robert Wilson, who's from Waco, who is an internationally known theatrical director and avant-garde all through his career. France knows him better than Waco, Texas, his hometown. He was born in 41.
Mm.
Terrance Malick
Mm-hmm.
was born in 1943. Now, he was born in Illinois. But all of them are in Waco. I was trying to find out, early 50s. Now, Steve Martin and his family moved to California when he was 5, which, interestingly enough, his dad had some sort of connection with Baylor Theater, Paul Baker. Because I remember talking with Paul Baker's daughter, Robin, about it. And it's just like, I was looking in yearbooks because I thought he might be on the faculty. And so, no, he wasn't on the faculty.
His dad was a performer. I remember reading about
Yeah.
that. And that's what inspired young Steve. He would go to these community productions and see his dad up on stage.
But it's interesting in that Steve's 2 autobiographies doesn't mention Waco at all.
Yeah.
It's like,
Not terribly proud of it.
yeah.
He's got to be kind of the most like most famous contemporary person, like from Waco, right?
I would
Like
think
that.
so.
That's the general consensus.
Yeah, probably with the most longevity of
Yeah.
career,
Yeah.
most impactful career. Probably.
Most impactful. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, because some of the people on here on this list, like if you asked somebody who was 20 or 25, they would know those names they would know them better than they know Steve Martin, but still his career has been going for a long time and is still going.
Yeah,
I mean,
I mean,
Only
with
Murders in the Building
that's
now is big, and even big with some younger people. So
And he's done a lot of writing and producing beyond
Yeah.
just acting.
His quote about Waco that I do love his quote when he does talk about Waco, which is not very often. He refers to this building, to the Alico building, because it was the only building, of course, the only tall building left standing. And he said, when you fly over Waco, it's the only city in America that flips you off when you look down on it, because it was the only tall building left in the city. So
I thought Bob Hope had said that.
no, I heard it was Steve Martin. But
Insert celebrity here.
yeah, I guess so. But since he's from Waco, I figured it might have been a.
Okay, so what's your favorite Steve Martin movie?
But before that, you mentioned Only Murders in the Building. Do you know the name of his TV character in Only Murders in the Building? So he's an ex-TV star.
Yeah, what is the name of it?
It's Brazos.
Yeah.
Brazos is his detective
That's
name.
true.
or whatever.
I did know that.
Yeah,
and
so I've always thought that's got to be a nod back to,
Yeah, it does.
where else would he come up with that?
Yeah.
So
That's a good point. I didn't even
Well,
make
we
that
need to
connection.
invite him to get on the podcast and explain that.
That may be another podcast. We can start another podcast. You were asking, yeah, I think that's a great, if you want to poll
Let's
the
hear
group.
it. Favorite Steve Martin?
My favorite Steve Martin movie is one of the lesser known ones. It's L.A. Story, which is people probably don't know this, but it's kind of his take on La Dolce Vita, which is Fellini's The Sweet Life. It's very much his L.A. version of La Dolce Vita. If you were to watch La Dolce Vita and then watch L.A. Story, it is very much him serenading LA. He obviously loves LA, but also sees the absurdities of it, which is really what La Dolce Vita was about. What I can't remember what city is La Dolce Vita about. I can't remember now, but in Italy. Rome. Yes, probably. So it's a love story to LA, but it's also about the absurdities of LA. It's a really hilarious, but it's also a very sweet film in a lot of ways. So.
Yeah. All right, Carl, you're an expert.
I hate these things. There's always a draw a blank. I remember his Saturday night stuff so much that it's hard to single out his comedy films. But I probably like his dramatic work as much.
His dramatic work is really impressive. Yeah.
And of course, I'm drawing a blank on the
Roxanne is another good one too.
Yeah,
his Cyrano film. Yeah.
So I'll bring one out of that I thought was funny. It was The Man with Two Brains.
It's hilarious. It's so stupid. It's
so
hilarious.
Ridiculously ludicrous, but a funny film, very funny. And of course, we all remember The Jerk.
Classic.
We never had seen anything like that in film, and that was the mark of his stand-up, right? It was so wild. Taking. I read his autobiography. Taking huge crowds out of 2,000-seat auditoriums and going down and buying burgers at McDonald's and things like that. And some of the things he used to do in his live show, remarkable.
Yeah. So the Father of the Bride series was obviously, very impactful. I remember
there's a sweet series of movies. My wife and I really love them.
Right,
Yeah.
and it wasn't as edgy as some of the other stuff. It was very endearing, and the story's great.
Parent Trap.
Yeah. There's one lesser known film he did called Leap of Faith.
Yep.
Which is actually set in Texas. They did some of the filming back in my hometown in Plainview, Texas. That was one of the sites of the filming. So.
Aluminum siding is the line that I remember. They had to work in. They gave him different words to work in into the sermon. Aluminum siding was one that he worked in.
Just remember when he was big live, when it was the same time that Robin Williams was coming up as a huge superstar comedian, and they were always kind of pitted against each other. And I was a huge Robin Williams fan, and so it was like you couldn't like the two of them at the same time. Mad Magazine, I remember, did a kind of a Robin Williams versus Steve Martin thing. So, and now I look back and I'm like, they're both brilliant. They're both brilliant comedians. So, why do we always pit people against each other?
Because it's clickbait. That's what it is.
Well, exactly. It sells magazines or subscriptions or whatever. But
Well, Chris, I'll ask you something in your wheelhouse here. So you talked about Steve Martin's kind of serious roles, and of course I thought of that with Robin Williams as well when he plays a dramatic role. I mean, what is the power of someone that we anticipate as a comedic actor? Because there is this power, I think, when they play against. Bill Murray does this when he plays against type. I mean, what is that? Why is that so impactful when we kind of see them playing against their type?
I just think it's, the reality is that these guys or women have just as much depth as the rest of us, but we're used to one side of them. I mean, Robin Williams and Steve Martin, back in those days, especially when you were watching those stand-up routines, which were like, I don't know, Robin Williams was like, I think my brother described him as just a wall of sound. I mean, it's like a nonstop, and he just could not stop talking, and he was hilarious. And you see him in like Awakenings, which I think is a beautiful film, and his performance in it is just beautiful. It's understated and small, and and that was there too.
Mm-hmm.
And that he could be this thing on the one hand and this other thing, at the same time is really remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it is. It's that we can laugh and laugh and laugh at what he can do, and then at the same time he can do this other thing that's so touching.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it is. So, I mean, Steve Martin's the same way. I mean, he can be the jerk, and he can be a wild and crazy guy, and have the arrow sticking out of his head, and all of the stand-up stuff that was zany and funny and crazy, and it was like the taking the people to McDonald's and all of the crazy stuff, and yet he also was capable of some really serious, dramatic stuff, and is a really thoughtful writer who's written. He's a playwright and a novelist, and I've read a bunch of his stuff, and he's a good writer, So like we box people into this one thing that they get famous for, but they're often, especially creative people, are often creative in a lot of different directions. So
yeah, Steve Martin has one of my favorite quotes about writing. I was collecting quotes about writing when I was working on my dissertation, and one of his quotes is, "I feel like I did pretty good because I just started out with a bunch of blank paper." So, look what I did. So anyway, Carl, other thoughts on Steve Martin before we move on?
None come to mind.
All right. So Steve Martin, come be on our show.
Probably definitely a little less caliber, but more current in some people's minds, especially because The Office gets so much continued play. I mean, all my kids have watched the whole series. I mean, the thing's been off the air for a decade
10
now?
years.
Yeah.
No, my son is 25. It is the soundtrack. I mean, they would just have it on if they were in the room, kind of playing. Of course, now with streaming, it can play over and over and over again. Yeah. That was the soundtrack.
Yeah. So Angela Kinsey, right, is our Waco connection to the show. She played Angela on The Office. She was a Baylor grad in '93.
Angela is the first person on this list that I've actually met. And she was in the same sorority that my oldest daughter was in at Baylor. Not at the same time, obviously, because Angela's my age. But I was at a Baylor event in LA that my department was a part of, and so she was there, and I decided, because I knew my daughter shared the connection there, I thought I'm gonna ask her if she would just say hi to my daughter on video, and I figured the Chi Omega connection would, she'd probably do it. And we have mutual friends, and I was one of the principals. I was one of the speakers at the event, so figured she'd do it. She was very friendly, but she was like, I said, "Would you just say hi?" And she was like, "Give me the camera." She took the camera and she immediately went into character as Angela.
Oh wow!
and she took the camera from me and did it in character as Angela to my daughter and her friends, and man, I got street cred off of that for a while. I sent it to my daughter, and my daughter is showing it to all with her friends at the time, her Chi
15
friend.
dad points.
Oh man, I got a lot of points off of that. So
That is great.
But Angela was great. She's a really sweet person and very funny. Yeah,
and still active too, right? In the industry.
Yeah, very active, and she's also got a podcast with. I can't think of the actor's name who played her counterpart on The Office.
It's Jenna Fisher.
Yeah. So I can't think of the name of the podcast. Something like The Office Girls or something like that. Yeah, where they it's a rewatch. It's a rewatch podcast where they talk about behind the scenes of every episode, and it's a lot of fun too. Yeah. They just they've become great friends, and everybody on that show just seems genuinely they had a great time making it. So yeah.
A lot of careers spun out of that show.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you guys know of any others? Those are some of the ones I found, but I know there's got to be more.
Allison Tolman.
Oh yeah.
Right, who was on Fargo.
Yes.
And
Fargo season 1.
Season 1.
Yeah, she's a deputy sheriff.
Yeah.
Fargo.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's playing essentially the role that was played by in the movie.
Frances McDormand.
Frances McDormand. Yeah, it's kind of Yeah, I mean, the
She
show's
does-
very different.
She
but
does a great job.
She's
though.
terrific. Yeah, that was her star-making role. She's
Mhm.
gotten a lot of play off of that. So she's a Baylor Theater alum,
Mhm.
and she still loves Baylor Theater and has a lot of friends there. And yeah.
I'm sure
Great.
there's some we're missing.
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's just the
This
first
is
one
not
that
a
came out.
comprehensive list.
Yeah, this
No,
is not a
no.
comprehensive list.
No.
Jesse Plemons came to mind.
Uh-huh.
He was born in Dallas, but he was raised in Mart, and of course, young kid actor and such. And I actually had met him and interviewed him, and he was all of 6 years old, I think. He was.
Oh, really?
He was doing a commercial. It was either for Dr. Pepper or HEB,
Oh, my goodness.
but now he is. He's quite the star. In
Also on a
Hollywood.
Fargo
Yep.
series, but
Oh,
he's
that's right.
yeah, he's
Yeah.
been in several different
Yeah.
Breaking Bad. I think Breaking Bad was his big
Breakout.
his big breakout role. But
Friday Night Lights was sort of.
Yes, that's
Oh,
right.
there you go.
Yeah, he's in the new Martin Scorsese movie, right?
That's right.
Killers of the Flower.
Mm.
hmm
And if you happen to have a Kirsten Dunst sighting in Waco, it's probably because
They're
that's his
married.
wife.
Yeah.
That's right.
Oh yeah, and they, yeah.
They were co-stars in that.
I was trying to think of the
in
connection
that
there. Yeah.
Fargo
Yeah.
third season, second season,
Second or third, yeah, I can't remember.
Yeah.
And a fifth season coming of that soon.
I like that show.
That's a good show.
So I found some writers and producers as well that weren't necessarily into acting. So you guys may know a little bit more about them. Thomas Harris was a Baylor grad.
Mm-hmm.
Worked at the Tribune Herald for a brief time.
Really?
You were
Before-
colleagues at the Tribune Herald?
No. No, back in the late 70s, I think.
Okay.
It is.
Okay.
Wow. And known for Silence of the Lambs.
Mm-hmm.
So did he
And
write the
Manhunter.
original?
I think he wrote the original Manhunter. if I
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah.
Yeah,
predecessor.
he wrote the whole series of all those books.
Mhm.
And then Terrance Malick, writer or director of The Thin Red Line. I don't know what other credits he might have.
Well, film locally.
Yeah, they
Yeah. The Tree.
Tree of Life.
Tree of Life.
Yeah.
Tree of
that's right.
Life is his Waco, his ode to Waco, ode to Central Texas, and shot here. Yes.
Wait, where did they shoot? Chris, do you know where they shot that primarily?
Gosh,
Smithville.
It was in Smithville area.
Smithville.
Okay. Okay.
But they did do B footage here.
Mm-hmm.
There's some scenes you'll see that are on Austin Avenue, some of the houses on Austin
Yeah.
Avenue.
Okay.
And then there's a scene or two you see the Alico building sort of in the corner. Such. His family used to live off of MacArthur Drive.
Okay.
And so it's easy to watch that film knowing that it's drawn a lot from his life,
Yeah.
and you see what Waco in the 50s probably felt like.
Yeah,
Suburban
that's our
Waco.
interpretation of it, knowing that. And one of our students in our program went to work for him doing editing and post-production at his company after graduating. He was a student, undergrad student, who also went to our grad program, and then went to work for Terry, as he calls him. So funny. But it's been fun because we'll bring him back in and have him do like zoom in and talk to the students about when we do our directing class about Terry's directing style, and it's always fun to kind of get the skinny on how he directs, which is a very unusual style because he just shoots. Malick is known for actors who were in his films who like they shot like the whole film and then they just never appear in it because he just changed the whole thing afterwards. So like he shoots and shoots and shoots and then he just finds the story in post-production afterward. And so he'll just change the whole thing. And actors who were in it are just like, well, I made a Malick film, but I'm not in it. So, but because of the way he edits, and that's what Christian, our former student, was telling us, that he just finds the story, and he has a lot of editors who are helping him put pieces of it together and put different versions of it together. And it's a very
That's an
unusual
interesting way to
style.
go about it.
Yeah, it's a very unusual way to do it, and he has no other director because of the money that this costs. He's doing it on his own. Studios are time is money, and there's a release schedule, and he's making these fairly expensive art films that he's just doing his own thing, and he has a reputation that allows him to do it. So yeah, and the actors aren't always happy about that. So could you imagine shooting for like weeks on a film and then with a legendary director, and then
do you still show up in the credits? That's the question.
Yeah, well, you got paid. That's the main thing.
Yeah.
So.
The question is, did you do it the second time?
Yeah, probably not.
Well, for those of us who graduated or went to Baylor in the 80s, the Reynolds name is pretty prevalent.
Mm-hmm.
So Herb Reynolds was the president of Baylor for many years. I don't know the bookends on that, but his son, Kevin Reynolds, has been a prolific director and done writing as well, right?
Yep.
Some of his works, Fandango, Robin Hood, Red Dawn, The Count of Monte Cristo, Waterworld.
Yeah, obviously you see a
There's a thread
strong
there.
partnership with Kevin Costner there. That ended at some point.
Yeah.
I think they had a falling out,
I think
as I
so.
understand it. Yeah.
Well, Waterworld, I don't think was a great experience based on
For
reports
the
of that
viewer either. No offense to either Kevin. It's a great idea, but not quite the film that it should be. So
I have a memory
Go
back
ahead.
when President Reynolds was at Baylor, but Kevin's film The Beast was coming out, and that's it's the story of the Afghan fighters against the Russian occupying force and such. And so they had scheduled this VIP screening. So President Reynolds and his wife was there, and Kevin and his family, lots of Baylor VIPs, coats and ties, that sort of thing they're showing it. Well, it's an R-rated movie because of the violence. And so I'm sitting there in the audience, and the audience is sort of like, okay. And they have a scene in the movie where there's a Russian tank that runs over an Afghan rebel and crushes his head. And it's just this pained silence. And they're like, oh, the president is here. I don't know how to react to this.
it's funny. I don't think that would even raise an eyebrow now.
Yeah.
Violence doesn't seem to bother people now. It's
Playboy magazine.
sex and yeah.
So one of his early movies with Costner, I think his first one was Fandango, right?
great
Which is a
movie.
cult classic.
Yeah.
It's actually based on his time at Baylor in his fraternity. And it was fun. As I was doing research for this, I found a blog where one of his old fraternity brothers is listing the characters and kind of who they really were in his life. And like one or two of them are people I know in Waco now.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, I didn't know that character was based on him. He's come a long way.
But it's written as UT, isn't it?
Yeah.
In
Right.
the movie?
Yeah, it's not Baylor.
They
Yeah.
didn't want to sully the Baylor name.
No, of course. Yeah.
Red Dawn, of course, iconic 80s
love
movie.
that. Wolverines, baby.
Yeah, I think that was his first big movie.
Yeah.
Just to make a name.
It's a
for
huge
himself.
hit at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. It had Swayze in it, right? And
It was all of those.
It's Charlie
Sheen.
Sheen's screen debut.
Is it really?
Is
I
in
didn't realize
is in
that.
Red
Okay.
Dawn. We used to do a Cold War film festival,
Hmm.
and we showed Dr. Strangelove, which is James Earl Jones's screen debut.
Huh.
I mean, two.
Boy, what a
Equal
pair
actors.
of films to show.
Yeah.
I love Strangelove and Red Dawn.
Yeah,
Wow. Talk about opposite ends of the political spectrum. Yeah, John Milius is one of the writers on Red Dawn. He's politically a little different than Kubrick.
Yeah.
So
One I want to squeeze in here that's not on our list that I know Chris will have and Carl have comment on is John Lee Hancock, who's a Baylor undergrad and then a Baylor law grad as well. But Blindside, I mean, he's a writer, producer, and director.
Yep.
I mean, he's done a lot of different films.
The Founder.
Yeah, which I love that movie. The
That's a good
Founder,
The Alamo.
Saving Mr. Banks.
Yeah.
Blindside, The Rookie, all those movies. The Alamo, of course, which I don't think was the success they hoped it would be, but
who could forget it?
yeah, exactly. We've tried.
It's not a bad movie, actually. It's
Yeah.
just, it's
Billy
not,
Bob
doesn't
Thornton.
quite come together.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Does Baylor have any?
Yeah, John Lee has come and spoken to our students.
Mm-hmm.
He's definitely a friend of the department. In spite of not having been a part of our department when he was here, he's an English major, I think, in undergrad, and you mentioned a law grad, but he's friends with a number of our faculty. I don't know him that well personally because his friendship with them predates my arrival. But I've met him a couple of times, and he's come and spoken, and he's good friends with another person on our list, Derek Haas. They're friends, and so he and Derek came a few years ago and spoke to the students about basically, career as writer and director in Hollywood and what that's all about. I think he came right before, while he was in the process of making, was it The Highwaymen, the Netflix film he made with Woody Harrelson?
Yeah, Kevin Costner.
Kevin Costner. So I think he was making that or in pre-production. I can't remember where he was in that process, but so yeah, great. I mean, he loves talking to the students. Really great guy. Just a busy guy. Because when he's not making one of his own projects, he's like a highly paid script doctor.
Okay.
So he's working on, which means he's working on other people's scripts, often uncredited. Fixing scripts for Hollywood productions, kind of making them better. And the way Writers Guild arbitration works, they don't always get credit for those things, but they'll get pretty good paycheck for them. So he does a lot of that work to kind of in between his own projects or to get his own projects to the next step, But yeah, he's still a big Baylor fan and has a lot of connections to Baylor and comes back when he can, when we make the ask,
yeah,
which we try not to do too often with some of these guys because they only come back so often.
Right.
Well, you mentioned Haas and Brandt, who I know have been very engaged.
Yeah,
with
very much
Baylor.
so.
A couple of my friends from college. Actually.
Oh, I didn't realize
really?
that.
Yeah. They don't call me anymore. I don't know why, but yeah. No,
well, if you keep asking for money,
Yeah. And you don't pay them back. I mean,
no, they are great. Yeah. And
good guys, really good guys.
Derek has so I mentioned Derek brought John Lee the last time he came. He brought Craig Mazin, who was the creator of The Last of Us show on HBO, and so Derek is always willing to not only come back but come and bring somebody with him. And Derek, of course, is creator of Chicago Fire, and one of the executive producers on the whole Chicago series and some of the FBI shows on TV as well. But I think he's just now left Chicago Fire after 11 seasons.
A long run, yeah.
And so he's decided. I mean, I don't know if you guys know anything about being a showrunner on television, which is what he has been for a long time. That's a long run as a showrunner, and that's a hard gig. And he was a showrunner on Chicago Fire and FBI International, which shoots in I don't remember which foreign country. I can't remember what country it shoots in, but it shoots in Europe. So he was, shooting in Europe and in Chicago, and lives in LA. He was exhausted, so he had decided it was time to move on and start doing some other things. I don't know what things, but yeah, he left Chicago Fire, and
besides TV, he's also done some movie stuff.
Yeah,
with Michael.
Yeah, he and Michael had done. They got their start on the second Fast and Furious movie. That was their
Too Fast, Too
Furious.
And it must have been successful because I think they've continued to make those movies.
A few of them, yeah.
Double digits.
He said that was getting the first feature made is getting your stamp into the club, and once they did that, then they made 3:10 to Yuma, and they made Wanted, and
I love 3:10 to Yuma.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. And Wanted is a great genre film. Great, kind of spy slash. I won't call it supernatural, but there's some elements to it that are like that. So it's a fun thriller, and but then they transitioned to TV and did all the television shows. I think though, Michael was ready to move on to do some other things, and then now Derek is too, and so But great supporters of Baylor come Derek's always up for a Baylor basketball or football game. And he usually times his visits with some big game like UT or,
something significant. Yeah.
He's so prolific, he probably doesn't do it anymore. But I know in his early work, there was sort of a running joke where he would have the names, he would work in the names of 2 Baylor professors in his characters and such. And so you would have.
He kills them off often, too.
Right.
So.
Yeah, you can't kill Darden. He just keeps coming back.
He killed Darden off. And the first character who dies in Chicago Fire is a firefighter named Darden. So.
Well, and he even worked in some of our other friends into Chicago Fire. There's another friend of our, Randy Flagler, who was in our fraternity too.
Who was a regular on it now.
Yeah.
I met Randy when I went out there right after the show had started, or no, right before it started. I met Randy. So and just great guy, really friendly.
Awesome guys.
Then the show started, and he shows up as Cap on or I think they call him Cap, and I was like, oh, that's Randy. Yeah, he's hilarious on the show. And I wanted just to shout out for Derek too, because he's been such a supporter of our department too. In just little, we have our student film festival every year, and Derek has given money for student prizes and stuff like that. He's just in very small, little ways, quiet ways. He's been very supportive of our program. Coming back and speaking to students on his own dime. He won't let us fly him in. He won't let us fly Craig Mason in. He pays for everything, and he just wants to do it all, and he's a big supporter of Baylor.
So. That's awesome.
Are there any other writers and producers that you guys could think of? I was going to skip down, still into the movie genre, movies about Waco or that are centered, have some connection to Waco. Mm-hmm. We've talked about a few here. But there's a movie called Waco that was in 1952 that's set in Waco and stars Bill Elliott. It's an old Western back in the Western heyday. And then ironically, again, in 1966, there was another movie called Waco. But this one wasn't set in Waco. It was set in somewhere in Wyoming. But the lead character's name was Waco.
Okay.
So... and then speaking of characters named Waco, a great reference is the Waco Kid.
Of course.
Blazing Saddles.
Yeah, which was not shot in Waco.
No.
But Gene Wilder in Blazing Saddles.
Blazing Saddles. Yep.
Chris, I talked to you earlier about just thinking about kind of the Waco landscape cinematically. There's been a lot of one of my recent favorites was The Old Man and the Gun, where there's a few shots in East Waco. There's the homage to the American Bank, the round American Bank that's no longer with us. But you've thought about Waco a lot through kind of a cinematic eye. Yeah. I don't think directors actually hold up their hands as squares anymore. I don't think
listeners can't see what you're doing.
Yeah, I know. This would be better on video. But you know what I'm saying. It's where you do the two L's that face each other and you hold it up against the landscape. But I'm interested as someone who has an eye for film, kind of how you think about the Waco landscape for something like that.
Yeah, that's an interesting question that I have been asked that before. And one of the things I really like about Waco is that within a fairly small or short distance, you can find a lot of different landscapes. So I've shot 5 feature films here, and one of them was a road trip, and we shot the whole road trip in Waco because when you travel through Waco, it looks different as you go to different places. And I mean, the only thing you lack really is, we're obviously we don't look like a big city. You're not going to get, we can't fake New York or, big foreign city or something like that. But at least we can't fake it in big vistas, but on the sidewalks downtown, you can kind of get away with some of that. And that's the thing I like about it is that, we can get a farm or a ranch, we can get the suburbs, we can get, a downtown look, and very easily within short driving distance, we can get all of these looks.
Yeah.
And I've shot you know, the Alico building, and I've shot the suspension bridge, and I've shot, you know, in the films as part of the stories. You know, I've incorporated all of those things because they're picturesque and they're beautiful, and, you know, why not use them? So it continues to grow and add, you know, new things. And I think Waco is underrated in terms of its ability to be a bit chameleon-like, you know. So you know, people think, oh, it's Waco. It's got a lot of different looks when you go from place to place, and I find that very interesting. And then just a little bit further out, you know, you can get even more, you know, rural and ranch. Like, you know, the next film I'm making next summer has a sequence where I won't go into the plot and everything, but there's a Western sequence where the characters are wishing that they were able to be cowboys. They're, you know, kind of trying to fulfill a childhood dream. And that, like, I'm not worried about being able to shoot that around here, you know.
Is Carl Shoulder going to be in this film?
We'll see.
You got to give the people what they want.
Right.
Maybe an elbow.
I did think of. No, go ahead, Carl.
Oh, I was thinking there was a movie or some footage that was shot a couple years ago. There was a series on the Sex Pistols called Pistol.
Yeah.
And there's snippets in that film that were shot in Waco.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a section where the characters are in a car driving cross country, but they're crossing the Washington Avenue Bridge. And then there's a scene where they arrive in San Francisco at night in front of the hotel they're checking into, but it's the front of the Alico building.
Yeah.
You know,
I knew they were shooting downtown for it. Yeah.
But it's one of those you have to, you know.
It's that little. That's all they shot. Yeah, I thought they shot more than that. Okay.
Wasn't there a zombie movie as well?
Yeah, Risen.
Yeah,
That was before.
Which is also the name of a Christian movie.
Of course. Yeah.
Zombies, saints, same thing.
Yeah, Risen was one of the Damon Crump.
Oh, Damon Crump. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the original independent films shot here. So yeah, and that's still going strong. They still show it in Waco and Halloween.
Memorable for the climatic scene of the zombie attack of the Belle Meade Civic Center.
Yeah. They had a lot of cooperation from Belle Meade. So
it's a film-friendly city.
So here's a tangential connection we haven't brought up, but is Taylor Sheridan.
Yeah.
So related to the McNamara family here in
Right.
town.
Mm-hmm.
A little foreshadowing to our next episode there. But in fact, one of the things we talk about in this series is the historical crossroads that Waco was, and then, you know, how having there was a ferry crossing and eventually a bridge and all that stuff. And in his 1883 series recently, or when I watched it recently, you know, a big part of a couple episodes of them actually having to cross the Brazos and people dying and, you know, getting swept away and how dangerous it was. And I thought, well, that's a beautiful, well, not beautiful, but it's a very distinct picture of what we're trying to describe of what travel was like and why towns like Waco had a huge advantage, because we had a bridge. I mean, it's something as low tech now as we would say a bridge is. I mean, it was life-saving then for those people. But anyway, Taylor Sheridan connected to some folks here in Waco, and he's been in town a few times.
And I have no idea how true some of this stuff is, but his film, Taylor Sheridan's film, Hell or High Water, that everybody said, oh, that character is based on Parnell McNamara. And I don't know how accurate that is, but I know Parnell McNamara loved that comparison.
No, he would say yes. Yeah, I mean, I think there's
a
connection.
I had the younger Parnell as a student, so, you know, grandson Parnell as a student. He's great guy still to this day. I see him occasionally at church. So.
Well, one of the things I liked about that film was he just had the tone of what Texas is like.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's so many times you see something about Waco, and, you know, and it's like, oh, it's Wild West. And it's like, well, no, it's not.
Yeah.
It's not.
One film that we got to mention, Rick, because we have a friend that was one of the principals in the movie, and that is Saronia. So Wes Cunningham's film, 2011 release, Saronia, which Wes Cunningham, who of course had his Nashville career, but was an actor there in Sarnia. And a lot of that is shot in Waco.
Yeah, Brandon
location.
Dickerson is the director. And Thomas Ward wrote that with Brandon. Yeah. And Wes. I think Wes was involved in the writing of it too. Yeah,
A little bit of it is biographical, I think. Yeah.
Well, no, the films I've seen that have been shot in Waco, that one felt like a story in Waco. I mean, I know it was, but just how the city and the community and how the people in it.
Yep.
Very much Waco.
So, Carl, what else are we missing here? What in that category of kind of film shot here or stuff that you've written about?
Well, I was thinking, too, of stories that happened in Waco that find their way into other movies. And so, like, you had Pearl Harbor, the film that came out in 2008, where it had a section on Doris Miller, actually, which many times you never see in a Pearl Harbor movie. But, the section of his heroism in battle, that's there. Cuba Gooding Jr. played Doris Miller. There was a film that Oliver Stone did on George W. Bush called W, in which part of it was set in Crawford and his ranch, but that was filmed in Shreveport, Louisiana. And so you look at it, it's like, it's not the foliage they have out at Crawford. And then there was a smaller documentary that came out called Crawford that was actually set in Crawford about how that town changed with the president, which was very good. Christopher Charles Scott did a 3-part documentary on Waco. What about Waco? That seen here locally, but I'm not sure how far it was distributed, but had actually Waco history in those stories. And then in Spike Lee's film Black Klansman, there's a section toward the end where Harry Belafonte is basically telling the story of the Jesse Washington lynching in pretty graphic detail.
In a very powerful scene.
Yeah, it is one of the most powerful scenes in the movie.
I understand there's a movie in the works that has Waco as part of the setting called K-Pop Lost in America, in which you have a Korean boy band that somehow is in Waco, and they need to get to New York for their debut concert. But
Rick is writing this down.
No,
I thought you were going to say Rick is writing this film.
I wrote that. I mean, no.
So that would be interesting. That's in discussion right now. I think Rebel Wilson is signed to that. Yeah. So we shall see.
Now, I don't think this was Waco, but was it close by the Sally Fields movie, Places in the Heart? Was that
where that was shot?
Was that Waxahachie or
Waxahachie.
Hillsborough?
That was
Hillsborough.
Waxahachie.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Where the Heart Is, which there's a lot of Baylor in that, and you can see Carl in the background.
And not just his shoulder.
Yeah. You can see a full frontal Carl in the background.
Sweating in a brown sweater.
which is worth the rental alone to see that.
Okay, we should mention something about the Magnolia Empire.
Okay.
For sure.
Well, this might be a good place to land to talk about. I mean, a network, right? I mean, now it's become this network. You could get into a little bit of the background here, but the end of it is now there's a national network, international network based in Waco.
Yeah. So, Chip and Joanna were home remodelers and builders and developers here, and then in 2012. I think the story goes they had something on a blog kind of showing some of her work or some of the interior design work, and then that got a producer saw that and reached out to him, said, hey, we've got an idea, can we come visit you? And that led to maybe doing some short clips and sending it to HGTV to see if they liked it. There was some some positive feedback that ended up with them developing a pilot in 2013 that was released in 2013 of them remodeling a house here for Doug and Lacey McNamee.
Yeah, I didn't realize they were on the pilot.
Yeah, they were the pilot. And and then it took off from there, right? I mean, but as Stephen knows, I've spent years doing Chamber of Commerce stuff, and we talk about economic development all the time. There's nowhere in the playbook for economic development that you go, hey, let's get a couple in our community and make them reality TV stars and just see where it goes, right? No, but it has been it's been great for them. It's been great for Waco's image. It's been great for our economy. I mean, not only all the tourists that come here now. I mean, people have moved here because of the show, but they have a thriving enterprise here with several hundred employees. Several businesses from restaurants to retail. If we probably of the people on the sheet we've talked about, or on the show that we've talked about so far, probably the most impactful TV program about Waco that we've ever had.
I think so.
I think so too. Yeah, I agree with you. I can't. You really can't overstate its impact on the city.
Mhm.
And I know there are people out there who are fairly negative about it. Well, whatever.
Somebody's always negative about something.
Yeah, that's true.
There may be people negative about this podcast. We don't
Well,
talk to them.
There should be if there aren't. Yeah.
We'd love to hear from you. No, but I mean, I think that, yes, there's always going to be somebody negative about something. I always find it interesting whenever there's an article about Chip and Joanna and the Waco Trib. I always read the comments on the Facebook, post of the article, and I'm like, "Ooh, that's interesting."
They get blamed for a lot of stuff.
Interesting cross section of opinion, but yeah, they do get blamed for a lot. But it's they have brought a lot of really great economic impact to the city. I mean, and really great, just like you said, the reputation, the change in reputation of the city, which I think had already been underway because of good things that Baylor was doing. I don't want to say that sports should be the most important thing, but Baylor had a really great, run in sports, which then unfortunately had some negatives, but which I'm not going to go into on this podcast.
That's another
which has
podcast.
Nothing to do with this podcast, I know, but well, I guess it is Waco history, but but they really, I mean, the show brought people here for a very positive reason. I mean, that one year I remember hearing Waco had more tourism than the Alamo because of Chip and Joanna, and I was like, wow, that's insane.
Mm-hmm.
But good for Waco.
Yeah.
So is very good for Waco, and the housing values rose because more people moving here, as you said, Rick. So I mean, all seems very positive to me. So.
I was on a recent Zoom call within our newspaper chain, and it was how to get reporters to code their stories in a certain way that gives them higher visibility in Google and search engine optimization, that sort of thing. And I'd said, our plight here in Waco is that every time you put Waco in the search field for a Google search, you get 20 things about Brandt Davidians, and it just sort of plugged it up. And one of the responses from one of the younger reporters on there says, I don't think of that at all. I think of Magnolia.
Yeah.
Yep. That's the change. Exactly what I was alluding to, really, is like they've erased that for a whole generation.
Yeah, from a national perception, definitely.
Yeah.
I play a history professor in the Castle series, and I think I'm believable.
A little bit of a stretch.
I think I'm
a little bit of a
believable.
stretch. Did before you came on, did they say 5 minutes talent?
They should have.
Yeah,
they should have. Yeah. Well, this has been great. I mean, we have covered a lot of ground.
A lot.
Yeah, Chris and Carl, I can't thank y'all enough for joining Rick and I.
It was a lot of fun.
Any other things you want to get in before we turn off the recorder?
I was just wondering, as long as you guys have been looking at Waco history, are there stories of Waco history that would make a good movie?
Oh, well, that might be a whole other
There's
episode.
some characters that
there are a host of characters.
I look at Sol Ross and I go, man, that guy lived a very interesting life.
Yeah.
Or I mean, just as one example.
And for instance, I heard there's a Tom Wilson biopic in the works. I mean, there's a story of, we've talked about him on another podcast, a record producer from Waco that had a storied career. So yeah, I think there are, but we don't want to give them away now because we will.
That's a good podcast.
We will save those for the next
edition
of the Waco History Podcast.
Well, I have another. So I wanted to, when you brought up the movie Saronia, which also stars Tony Hale of Arrested Development fame. So Tony Hale's a friend of mine.
Oh,
and
Veep. I mean, Tony Hale, very gifted
Veep,
comedic actor and serious actor.
And serious actor, yeah. And he and I were in graduate school together.
Okay.
And so when I was here and making my very first film, I tried to jokingly blackmail him because he was in my first directing project in grad school, and I threatened to release it to his adoring fan base if he didn't star in my first film, which he was not able to do because he didn't have the time. But he did agree to come and do like a day on the film. So he came to Waco and shot a day on my first film. And so Tony Hale has a Waco connection and has made a film in Waco. So he's got a small role in my first film that we shot here in Waco. And again, street cred with my students because the rest of the development was huge at the time.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And he came in, did a day on the film. The students were adoring, and then he did an evening of speaking with the students and doing Q&A with them. So he's a wonderful guy. I was out in LA because we have a new LA program that I was kind of doing a review of, and I had a chance to have lunch with him, and just a sweet guy.
Oh,
so,
that's great.
Yeah.
I appreciate you getting that in here. That would have been remiss if we didn't get it in. Well, thanks.
Well, that's good. Yeah.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Carl. And thank you for listening.
Cross the Brazos and Waco, ride hard and I'll make it by dawn.
Thanks for listening to the Waco History Podcast. Like what you heard? Subscribe, rate, and review our show on iTunes so we can reach more listeners. You can find show notes and info on every episode at wacohistorypodcast.com, and more info on Waco's past at wacohistory.org. Our theme music, used with permission, is Cross the Brazos at Waco, performed by the late Billy Walker. For more info on Billy's music, go to billywalker.com. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time. This has been a Rogue Media Network production.